Hey guys, I'm Andrew Luke and welcome to High Score. A few weeks ago, I went out to see Distant Worlds, music from Final Fantasy. Game music performances don't come around very often, so I had to go see this. I was stunned to see all these amazing orchestral arrangements that I knew I had to make a video about this. Unfortunately, I've only dabbled in a couple of the Final Fantasy games, and I thought it would be a huge disservice if I didn't play through it first. So I've managed to play through the PlayStation version of Final Fantasy, and wow, it's got some pretty dated mechanics. However, the music still holds up very well, and it easily kept my attention throughout the entire playthrough. Now, let's talk about it. Final Fantasy was released in 1987 for the Famicom, and later in 1990 for the NES. It was developed by a man named Hironobu Sakaguchi. Sakaguchi wanted to make an RPG for a long time, but there was fear that it wouldn't be a financial success, and Square was getting pretty close to going bankrupt. After seeing the success of Dragon Quest in Japan, they decided to give him a chance. Sakaguchi stated if it wasn't successful, he was going to leave the gaming industry. It was truly going to be his final game. By today's standards, Final Fantasy's story is pretty simple, but at the time, it was a massive adventure. Your four characters, known as the Warriors of Light, start off on a quest to save Princess Sarah. Right after that, it quickly turns into a grand adventure where you must travel the world and restore the four crystals. The game was a pretty decent financial success, and now Final Fantasy is one of the most popular RPG franchises in the world. Now, how did Final Fantasy succeed? I may be a bit biased, but I think the music does help it out. Let's take a look at the composer. The composer for Final Fantasy is one of the biggest composers out there, sometimes considered to be the Beethoven of video games, Nobuo Uematsu. Despite having such a huge reputation behind him, Uematsu was never formally trained on any musical instruments. In fact, he was completely self-taught on piano. After graduating from Kanagawa University, he worked as a freelancer playing for a bunch of bands and composed for some TV commercials. While Uematsu was working at a music rental shop, a Square employee came up to him and asked, "Hey, wanna make some music?" Uematsu took up the offer thinking, "Yeah, I need the money." And boom, he got a new full-time job. He started getting work at the studio with games such as Cruise Chaser Blasty and King's Knight. Not exactly the best starts. But eventually, he met Sakaguchi and teamed up with him for the creation of Final Fantasy. What he didn't know at the time is this was the beginning of his own adventure, a journey to absolute success. Since the release, he's composed for over 30 games while working at Square, most prominently the first 10 Final Fantasy titles. So what exactly makes his music so successful? Well, let's take a look. Now, Final Fantasy has a decent amount of music that we can talk about. However, I want to focus on 3 pieces specifically because they're all reoccurring themes throughout the franchise. Our first piece is known to many as the Final Fantasy Prelude. This is what plays when you open up almost every single Final Fantasy game. There's a couple interesting things to look at here. While researching this piece, my friend actually told me about a podcast called Classical Classroom that actually talked about this same prelude. I'll go ahead and pull up the clip here, but what this guy talks about is a potential source of inspiration for this piece.
One of the things that I think is really interesting about this kind of music is that it actually can sometimes borrow from traditional classical music as we know it. So one of the pieces that there's not really a piece that I can immediately think of that sounds exactly like this piece, but one of the first pieces that comes to mind that might have been an influence on it is Bach's first prelude from the Well-Tempered Clavier.
Okay, let's take a quick listen to Bach's Prelude. What he goes on to say is that these two pieces do have a lot of similarities. Both of these pieces use arpeggiated chords that rise and fall throughout the piece. Taking chords and breaking them up into arpeggios is one of the most common, yet most effective tactics that composers use. One thing to note is that at the end of the Final Fantasy prelude, the last few arpeggiated lines do sound a little bit different. While the piece is within its own key, the last two chords stand out a little bit, a flat 6th and a flat 7th. This is another popular tactic called modal mixture, or simply put, borrowed chords. Well, you know how there's a major and a minor scale? Well, sometimes composers like to borrow from the parallel minor or major scale as a way to add some harmonic variety. We're in the key of B flat major, and the flat 6th and flat 7th are directly from B flat minor. We actually see a similar theme with the next piece, and I think most gamers will know this one. The Victory Fanfare, the most popular theme that everyone and their cold gamer grandma knows. It plays every time your party wins a battle. The first thing I noticed when analyzing this piece is that it's not in major or minor. It's actually in Dorian mode. So we have major and minor scales, but they're also known as Ionian and Aeolian modes. We mainly use those two modes, but in Western classical music, there's 7 main modes that we can talk about. With Ionian starting on the 1st scale degree, and Aeolian starting on the 6th, Dorian starts on the 2nd scale degree. The most interesting part to me comes at the very last measure, where once again, it borrows the flat 6th from another scale. It's interesting to me because modal mixture is most often used between major and minor scales. You don't often see it used for other modes like Dorian. I think it's really cool that Uematsu actually used a different mode. I mean, the original diminished 6th chord probably wouldn't sound too hot with this one. Anyway, the last piece I want to talk about is the main theme for the franchise. This just holds the title of Final Fantasy, and as it stands, it's the theme to represent the entire franchise. Well, except for Final Fantasy II. It doesn't have that for some reason. Anyway, the main thing I want to talk about in the music is the way that the key modulates throughout the piece. But Andrew, what do you mean by that? Well, I'm going to pull out this handy-dandy chart called the Circle of Fifths. This is a chart every music student has to memorize, as it includes every key signature in both major and minor. So if we follow along, we'll see that the music goes from F major and slowly keeps on moving to the left. So it starts off in F major, then it briefly goes into G minor before it goes back to F major. The segment repeats itself, and then instead of G minor, it goes to the relative major, B flat. Then it will continue going around quickly from E flat and then to A flat before repeating the entire piece. Now that was a lot of musical detail. Let me explain why it's important. So to start off, Prelude. Why should we care about the arpeggio patterns? Well, as it continues playing out here, having it elevate to the fluid motion gives this feeling that we're entering a new world. It tells us that we're about to embark on a new, fantastical adventure with many wonders to it. In the Baroque era of music, preludes were designed to be introductions to a larger piece of work. It makes sense. This piece was designed to be an introduction to the game. It's a piece that says, you're in for a treat. The Victory Fanfare is about as cheery and catchy of a tune as you can get from the series. Dorian mode. While many of its scores have a naturally melancholy tone to it, the way it's utilized and bent here creates something that's uplifting and motivating. It makes you feel like all your strategic hard work has been paid off. As for the modulating Final Fantasy theme, I think it signifies something greater. Having the piece be able to evolve and take form very much represents the journey of the Warriors of Light. Having your own personal characters go through a long fantasy journey, being able to physically grow and change, it makes sense to have a piece that evolves with it. Uematsu has a great understanding of what the music needed to be, and with that, his music gave the final touch it needed to truly become its own identity, its own story, Final Fantasy. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching this episode of High Score. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. Twitter and Facebook links are down in the description below. If there's any games that you want to see me talk about, please tell me about them in the comment section down below. New episodes will be released every other week, so I will see you all in the next episode. Bye!